Hello and welcome back to Bayside Book Chat here at Barry Allen Books and Art in Stone Harbor, New Jersey. This is Volume 4 and it is the Earth Day edition. And later on we're going to take this show outside for Earth Day. I hope you've been able to watch 1 through 3. We're on Facebook and YouTube. And speaking of those social media platforms, like us, love us, share with your friends. And to remind you all that, of course, we are happy to ship books through the United States Postal Service. So we're going to kick it off here. Last time I was wearing the same shirt and the same hat, and I forgot to talk about it. So it's going to really work this time, being that it's Earth Day. And you can see it's all about whales. So we got a Stone Harbor whale t-shirt in the fall here in Stone Harbor, off the coast in October, November, December, with a good pair of binoculars. If you're watching out and you see the birds working, you're going to be able to see humpback whales. They're obviously very common in the Delaware Bay and are often seen not only from the whale watching boats, but also the Cape May Lewis Ferry. I got my Campobello whale watching hat on, one of the greatest days of my life. We saw, I think, 4 species of whale in one day up in the Bay of Fundy off of Campobello Island, including the very rare, I think there's only 400 left in the world, the right whale, which has a fluke that's just as big as this room. So that's a shout out to my Uncle Brian and Aunt Donna, who have a home up in Campobello where we like to get to once in a while. So last week we moved over here in front of the bookshelf to start off the show, and this week I just want to talk a little bit about bookshelves. You see it a lot on the TV news these days, everybody doing their home office shots behind them. Bookshelves are a way for people to organize all the books that they've read. They can evaluate what they want to keep and not, and they obviously keep the ones that mean something to them. So when people have things on their bookshelves, they can look back in time. They remember when they read the book. It's an easy access for them to pull back down, maybe read again, make some notes, lend to a friend, pass on to somebody in the family. But for now, we're going to swing back over to the chair where we're going to have our book chat. So again, welcome to another Wind Down Wednesday here at Barry Allen Books and Art. This is the corner where we talk a little bit. This is the book chat corner. And the last couple of weeks, you've heard me talk a little bit about a Tolkien quote. I won't reread it to you, but it parlays into a mindset here. Tolkien made a quote about enjoyment of, basically, family, friends, food, wine. And it reminded me of somebody who's meant a lot to me in my life that's no longer with us, and that's Anthony Bourdain. And, of course, he's famous for, he wrote a book called Kitchen Confidential. But then he also wrote a book that was called A Cook's Tour, which was the beginnings of a tour around the world with chefs. And of course, that became the very well-known CNN TV show called Parts Unknown, which I absolutely loved. And he really stressed in those shows not only the food and the wine and the family and the friends that we just talked about, but he talked about how more unites us than divides us. And he really spent a lot of time trying to help you understand other nations, other cultures, other people. And then he used food as a medium for all to share. I'm a big believer that sports and the Olympics and food and cheer, and wine, here we are on wine night, that we have a lot more in common with people around the world than what divides us. And I think that's what Anthony Bourdain was trying to get across to us all. So on wine night, we like to do a toast, of course, and I like to do a quote. So tonight's quote is from Anthony Bourdain, and he says, "Go out and see your friends and eat tapas and drink red wine and be in a beautiful place." And of course, if you're missing this beautiful place, you'll be back. We'll be here, and you can come see us on a Wednesday night wine night. In the meantime, I've mentioned before about our artists, and every week we're going to start talking about the artists that we have in the store. And one of the first artists I had in here was a local friend named Michael Zuccato. And I mentioned before it was his aunt that this bookstore took over when she had a hair salon, and this became the bookstore after that. He does a Facebook live shot a couple times a week. In the summer, he probably does it about every day. and it's an opportunity for people who just can't be at the beach that day to see the sun go down. And a lot of times he talks about the beach and things. So if you're missing the beach and you want to see the beach, I don't know how many times he's doing it, but Michael Zaccato's Facebook page is a neat thing to check out. In terms of my wine, because of Anthony Bourdain, I then picked out over at Fred's behind me there a nice Spanish red. So to Anthony Bourdain. And we're going to continue on here with, every week we do a quote by FDR, and this week I have it pulled up on my phone. And FDR says, the only sure bulwark of continuing liberty is a government strong enough to protect the interests of the people, and a people strong enough and well enough informed to maintain its sovereign control over the government. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So we talk presidential leadership here, and although this gentleman was not a president, he had great leadership, and it's Winston Churchill. And he is quoted as saying, "It is no use saying we are doing our best. You have to succeed in doing what is necessary." A short way of saying that might be, actions speak louder than words. In America right now, with the coronavirus pandemic, in terms of leadership and what we need to be doing as a people, I think we need to have more tests, and we need to have the PPE, and we need it ASAP. And when you think about this country and what we spend on military and the great America and preparedness, how do we not have those things already? The cost of a B-1 bomber is $500 million. So we spent $500 million on one B-1 bomber, but with this virus, you can't shoot it, you can't bomb it. And right now, there's been a lot of talk again about the southern border, but it wasn't the southern border that the virus got here. It was travelers and business people returning from China and Europe. Despite the bans to other countries or people from other countries, it was a lot of American business people, wealthy people, vacationers, returning to the United States. So I think, again, we got to get our priorities straight and really think about what we need. And obviously, we're seeing that we were insufficient in some areas of having the materials that the frontline healthcare workers need in this country. It's all about approach and leadership. Sweden took a different approach. It's called the herd mentality, and right now they're performing 5 to 10 times worse than the rest of Scandinavia. The results of their plan isn't working real well. And today we just found out that it looks like the early test on the, and I hope I don't butcher this word, the hydroxychloroquine is not doing as well as some people had hoped. So for now, I think we need better testing. And we need the swabs in America right now. And last week I talked about isms. This week it's about abilities. Ability, responsibility, capability, and believability. You're also seeing in the news that we're trying to do the economic stimulus package. I mentioned that I thought that during that last recession that businesses or banks were labeled too big to fail, and I was worried about small mom and pops being too small to get money. And if you're following the news, of course, you can see that they're having a big debate on making sure that the small mom and pops get their money. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about mom and pops. This is a mom and pop store. I work for Hoy's. That's a kind of a mom and pop store in itself. 2/3 of the money that mom and pops the income that they earn from that stays in your local community through donations, charities, beef and beers, your local Little League. So small mom and pops are not only economically beneficial to your local community more than the big box stores do. A big box store, they earn their money and then it's out of here. It's to whatever state that their home base is. Your local mom and pops, the money stays here. And our mom and pops add a lot to our local business district here in Stone Harbor. I'm sure if you've been to Cape May and Ocean City, you can see how cute and quaint the stores are. and these stores raise a lot of money for the state of New Jersey and this country, in sales tax and in luxury tax. So shop small, love your mom and pops. So as mentioned earlier, it's Earth Day, and it's actually the 50th anniversary. Begun in 1970, Earth Day was, and I know we all want clean air and water. And I remember as a young boy, we were in the Adirondacks with my parents camping. This is probably late 70s, and I spent a couple hours fishing in a canoe with my brother. Came back to the dock, and the ranger said, "How'd you do?" And I said, "I don't think I even saw a fish." And he's like, "Well, that's because there aren't any fish here." And that was the effects of acid rain, where in that time period, the acidity and the pH of the water due to acid rain didn't allow for much to live in the lakes. And we worked so hard in this country to get that time period behind us, to get rid of acid rain. In 1972, we passed the Clean Water Act. We passed the Migratory Bird Act. Lately, in the last couple of years, there's been a strong effort to dismantle them, including the Paris Accords. I don't know how happy Mother Nature would be about that. So let's all strive as we go forward to make this planet and the earth that we live on a wonderful, healthy place that it can be. And to go see some of that, we're going to take a little trip out to our garden. Hey, thanks for joining us out here in the garden. We figured we'd do the nature section outside today since it's such a nice day. So I welcome you to my garden. I've got my beer, I've got my books, got my garden, got my dog Gar here. My daughter Parker is taking the film, so what could be better, right? So welcome to my garden. It's a nice day to be outside, and you'll hopefully hear, although you're probably going to hear some cars driving by, maybe a neighbor's chainsaw or mower. You might hear hopefully some birds singing. We do get a lot of birds out here. I guess it's because I bribe them with food, but you'll hear some white-throated sparrows and some cardinals certainly singing. And if I hear anything more exciting than that, then I'll try to point it out. Here comes a car. That's the white-throated sparrow. In the store, we had talked a lot about Rachel Carson, and I'm going to take just a tidbit of that and move on to how that relates to what we're doing out here with the birds and the bees. And of course, that was the effects of DDT, which had a big effect on the eggs of ospreys, eagles, and peregrine falcons. And then we also talked about last week how chemicals that large farms and even homeowners spray that have a great effect on the bees and butterflies. So I'd like to tie that into a little bit of some local stories that correlate to some of that, which is, for those of you that don't know, and if you're ever at Hoy's, if you come see me at Hoy's, that's my real job. The bookstore is my family fun hobby job. I can turn you around and point up into the water tower many times, mostly in the spring, in the fall, occasionally in the winter. There's a peregrine falcon that sits up in that water tower. And during the heights of DDT, we were down to 26 nesting pair in the state of New Jersey, and now we are over 100. Basically, the DDT made eggs of birds of prey through biological magnification so weak that when they would hatch the eggs would not hold up, and that's what was going on with that. But the reason I mentioned the falcon is this is a great trivia question for not only our trivia, but anytime you're playing trivia with your family and friends. It's the fastest animal in the world. Yes, a cheetah is fast, but it has 4 legs. The peregrine falcon, when it's hunting, will fold up its wings and dive down at a speed of 200 miles an hour clocked. So it's making it the fastest bird in the world. Another local story relating to the birds and the bees is in front of the Stone Harbor Elementary School. You will see a lot of milkweed planted, and that led from a discussion of a local neighbor to the school, my friend Jay, who told me a story about him having some discussion with kids about what they thought was a weed. And of course, milkweed's called a weed, milkweed. But it turns into a plant that later on in its life cycle is food and a primary source of food and safety for the monarch butterflies, which we have a lot migrating through here in September and October, and then especially at the end of that cycle along the dunes in October on the right wind conditions, you will see many monarch butterflies heading south along the dunes, chasing the goldenrod south. So I got some books out here, and we talked about some of these before, and they kind of tie in a little bit. I'll move my beer here. Gar, watch my beer. 3 good books to have as a birder are, I've mentioned before, the Sibley Guide. He's the latest and the most popular. Peterson, pioneer in the 70s and the most renowned. And then this is the pictorial guide of the early Audubon books. But the neat thing about that is it actually has photos. So you can actually see pictures of the birds in real life photos, which, you know, obviously then gives you a sense of what they really look like, where the first 2 books were mainly off of artist drawings. So these are, if you're a birder, these are the pocket size. It's not bite weight. These are 3 guides that are very handy to have. I mentioned Richard Prenneke before and how he kept notes when he was up there in his cabin in Alaska. So what I've done is I have a little notebook, don't do it all the time, but if I see something I don't normally see, or I have an observation that I want to remember, another thing I do is I try to write down the first day. Soon we'll be having the warblers fly through, and you know, the males will be in their bright colors, and they're very beautiful to see. And it's like, oh, what was the first date I've ever seen one before? You know, what's the most birds I've seen on this property? The other day I wrote down, about 4 or 5 days ago, I had still seen a slate colored junco, which, you know, they leave here in the summertime. So what's the last day I'm going to see them? So I keep a little notebook handy. This is a book of farm rhymes. I grew up working on a farm in central PA for 3 or 4 years of my life, and it was one of my favorite jobs of all time. A very popular author wrote a lot of stories and poetry on the outdoor farm life. His name was James Whitcomb Riley, and this is a very nice collectible copy from the 1920s. And then there's some books about, since we're outside and we're talking gardening, this is called The Botany of Desire, and this is called Seeds. And they are books that, if you're an aficionado of gardening, it gives you the history of plants and fruits and vegetables. And to tie it all in, like I said before, I read the Richard Prenneke book with the year-round notes on what it was like to live in that cabin in Alaska. This is somebody else who wrote a book. It's called The Year Outdoors: A Naturalist Calendar by Eva Rodimer. And once in a while, this was done in the hills of North Jersey, up by the Delaware Water Gap. And sometimes, once in a while, on a cold winter day, I might read a few pages of this. They're just people or her notes on what she saw in the outdoors. Getting back to us and tying nature into the Stone Harbor area, as you know, in the business district, there's been a big push to go green. And one of the things that's been in the back of my mind is working for Hoy's and having our own bookstore, is that's what the business community can do and has been asked to do, but what can residents and the school and the municipality, the police department, what can everybody do collectively? I think we all need to do things collectively. So I'm asking and hoping that it's not just a business district that pushes some of these things forward, but obviously solar energy on a lot of more homes. You know, the timeliness of when you water your yard and garden doesn't have to be done in July at the same time a rainstorm's going on. And then where does that runoff go? We have a multitude of cars in the summertime. People are putting pesticides and fertilizer on our yards. We all have to remember that goes right out into the same waters that we swim and fish and crab in. And we got to keep that in mind. You know, it's the footprint that we all have a responsibility for. How big of a house do you build? How much does it cost to heat it? Do you have solar? Are you using electric vehicles? Those kinds of things. In our local area in New Jersey, things that have occurred relating to that is we have a lot of red tide issues. similar to what Florida has in Barnegat Bay, up behind Long Beach Island, where so much fertilizer and pesticide meets that hot summer water, and you have a lot of algae growth. And having surfed here since the 80s, one thing I've learned from talking to old timers, boy, I'll tell you, we had a nice sun going there for a while and clouded over on us, is how much the winds have changed. And you've heard of an offshore wind. Surfers talk about it all the time, that if you get up early in the morning and the wind is blowing from the west towards the ocean, a lot of that has to do with temperature gradients. In the summertime, the ocean heats up, the air on a clear night cools, so the warm air rises, so the air came from the mainland and created offshore winds. But in the last 20, 30 years, as Cape May County has been developed up with, here a little chickadee calling out now, with macadam and parking lots, it is the blackness of the roads absorbing a lot of heat. And then at nighttime, that is making that balance change where it's more even and we're getting less offshore winds. That's an observation that a lot of surfers have made. So that's my garden talk for today. And we're gonna change positions here. I'm gonna become the photographer. My daughter Parker plays a wonderful song, and I think you'll know it, and it's about parking lots.
Happy Earth Day. They paved paradise, put up a parking lot with a pink hotel, a boutique, and a swinging hot spot. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you got till it's gone? They paved paradise, put up a parking lot. They took all the trees, put them in a tree museum, and they charged the people $1.50 just to see them. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise, put up a parking lot. Hey farmer, farmer, put over that DDT now. Give me spots on apples, but leave me the birds and the bees. Please, don't it always seem to go then you don't know what you've got till it's gone? You paved paradise, put up a parking lot. Late last night I heard the screen door slam, and a big yellow taxi took away my old man. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise, put up a parking lot. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise, put up a parking lot. Yeah, they paved paradise, put up a parking lot. Yeah, they paved paradise, put up a parking lot.
So I hope you enjoyed the garden session. I hope you enjoyed Parker's song as much as I did. And last week, Parker talked about Louisa May Alcott. And for those of you that didn't know, I think Parker covered some of this in her book chat. She spent a lot of time up near Walden Pond in Concord, Massachusetts with Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson. So I'm going to read you just a short little thing about that group of people. So for literature lovers, this lovely historic town, meaning Concord, which oddly enough, that was supposed to be Parker's spring break trip with my grandparents, or my parents, her grandparents, and my brother, but it was canceled due to the pandemic here. So we're going to have to save that for a future trip. But they were going to go to Concord, Mass. And for literature lovers, this lovely historic town about 20 miles northwest of Boston offers an embarrassment of riches. Louisa May Alcott was there, Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Nathaniel Hawthorne all lived and wrote and exchanged ideas in Concord, and that was labeled. Their group was labeled transcend. Is a hard word for me to say. Transcendentalists. And of course, there's Walden Pond, the inspiration for Thoreau's seminal work, Walden, which lures thousands of visitors every year to the site where the writer simply was in a cabin from 1845 to 1847. Among Concord's many unspoiled sites is the Author's Ridge in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, where the town's literary lights, Louisa May Alcott, Emerson, Thoreau, Hawthorne, were all buried in the same graveyard. And oddly enough, in American history, in Concord, yes, it is that Concord where during the Revolutionary War, the first shots that were heard around the world were shot. And last week, Parker gave the book review. This week, my father, James Langle, is giving the book review, and he was inspired by me talking about The Grapes of Wrath in an earlier episode, and he sent in his, which we call Pop's book review, The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. He said he first read it in high school during the COVID-19 crisis. He's had plenty of time to read, not that he didn't already, but he said he's gone back and is rereading some classics. And he sees how some of these great books shaped his world. The Grapes of Wrath will help you to understand how climate change, in this case drought, can uproot a generation. The Dust Bowl in Oklahoma, Kansas, and northern Texas in the 1930s caused many changes in the agricultural life of many American farmers. A work of fiction, the book tells the story of the Joad family migration from Oklahoma to California. This story will put in terms that you can understand the problems that displaced workers faced during the Great Depression. It highlights the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And he felt that it was a timely and worthwhile read. So thank you to Pops for the send-in book review. And for kicks and giggles, we've got two of the books that we were just talking about, Walden, or Life in the Woods, and The Grapes of Wrath. And this is the original book without the dust jacket, but there it is. Quickly, we're going to go through the PBS books. In the previous, we've gone through 1 through 20, and we are now going to go through 21 through 30. So we're talking about John Steinbeck, and this is one author that we definitely have a lot of in the store. So we'll take a picture of that and incorporate it into our show, so I don't spend too much time talking about all the titles, but there's a lot of them there. So speaking of books, and a lot of books, we always talk about the PBS list. So here they are. This is from the Great American Read, and number 21 was The Wuthering Heights by Bronte. I do not have Lonesome Dove, but I do have a lot of Larry McMurtry books. I've had many a reader in here, including, I think, my father-in-law, saying it's one of the best books they've ever read. Another book that we have a lot of interaction with readers who talk about how much they like the book is Ken Follett's The Pillars of the Earth. That is a part of a trilogy, and highly recommended by many of the readers that come in our shop. We've talked before. Number 24 is The Stand by Stephen King. Number 25 is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Number 26, I do not have this book either, Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving. He wrote the Cider House Rules. Number 27, The Color Purple. I think Oprah was in that movie. Of course, we all know the classic children's adventure tale, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, was number 28. Number 29 by Charles Dickens, Great Expectations. And a classic that is much talked about in literary circles is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. All right, it's time for trivia, almost to the end here, so we're going to rattle through them. Last week we mentioned what Orwell book referred to communism. Animal Farm. What was the nearest lighthouse to Stone Harbor? Hereford. What book, Silence of the Lambs, did Hannibal Lecter, what wine did he refer to? Chianti. What book did I like as a young boy that was titled Seawolf? Who wrote it? Jack London. On the Stone Harbor logo that the town uses, there's two things on the logo, on the shield, I guess you would call it. One is a white egret. The other is the the boat that I had mentioned before called the Comet. Tom Clancy, of course, wrote Hunt for Red October, but then he went on to write a series of books that had a character that was named Jack Ryan, and it was John Krasinski of The Office fame, who was the last actor to play Jack Ryan. The inlet that separates Avalon and Sea Isle City is called Townsend's Inlet. The most printed book in the world is the Bible, and the gentleman who created the press that enabled the book to be mass produced was Gutenberg. Brings us to this week, and it's Earth Day. So we're going to have some Earth Day questions here. Some are books, some are nature, some are both. Another name for a declining tide is what? Another name for a receding tide. The fastest animal in the world is blank. What book helped launch the modern environmental movement and led to the widespread ban of DDT? What is the name of the dog in Call of the Wild? What is the name of Dr. Seuss's book about saving trees? What year was the first Earth Day? What author wrote A Walk in the Woods? Give me the name of the French marine conservationist who created the aqualung, a very famous ocean explorer. And 9, this is for my cousin Chris, who says everything's too Jersey, too local. He's from Pennsylvania, where I grew up. What is the PA state bird? And what is the Pennsylvania state flower? So here at the end of our Earth Day episode, which my guess is probably going to be the longest episode we've done so far, and maybe the longest one we ever do. We had to squeeze in Earth Day. It's too important. So we always end with a toast. It is wine night, and I've got my bottle of red here in honor of Anthony Bourdain, like we said. And so I want to do a toast to thank the viewers. We talked about mom and pop businesses, so thank you to mom and pop businesses for making it happen. And to Anthony Bourdain, you know, I miss you. I miss watching your shows. I feel a little less connected to the world without you. Until next week, keep low, aim high, be smart, be safe, shop small, and there's nothing better than fine wine, fine friends, fine times. So thanks again for watching, and hopefully this summer you'll come in and have a glass with us.